fallout is growing from the Department of Justice's admission that it mistakenly deported a Maryland man to a prison in El Salvador. A federal judge in a scathing decision is lambasting the deportation, calling it wholly lawless.
U.S. District Judge Paula Zinnes says the administration had no legal grounds to arrest, detain, and deport Salvadoran national Kilmar Abrego Garcia from the United States to a prison in his home country.
Judge Zinnes is ordering the United States to return Abrego Garcia, writing in her 22-page decision, "Neither the United States nor El Salvador have told anyone why he was returned to the very country to which he cannot return, or why he is detained at CICOT." She added, "That silence is telling, as defendants acknowledge," that's the Department of Justice, "they had no legal authority to arrest him, no justification to detain him, and no grounds to send him to El Salvador, let alone deliver him into one of the most dangerous prisons in the Western Hemisphere."
Meanwhile, the Department of Justice has placed one of its senior immigration lawyers on leave who had criticized the Trump administration over mistakenly deporting Abrego Garcia. Attorney General Pam Bondi said in a statement, "At my direction, every Department of Justice attorney is required to zealously advocate on behalf of the United States. Any attorney who fails to abide by this direction will face consequences." So look, I'm not sure we've tackled this issue yet, you and I. I agree that it was an error. The administration has admitted that they were not supposed to deport him to El Salvador. They could have deported him anywhere else, but not there. So they should not have done that, and they should take steps to remedy that mistake, and so they should. Now, I think the media's framing of this story from the get-go was a little bit misleading, of focusing on, oh, a father, oh, this or that. I can't say for certain that he is a member of the gang MS-13, but the judge that initially handled this matter years ago was certainly convinced of that by the evidence, and I think that was a little bit buried in the headlines. So it would be, and people have the view, I think most people in the country have the view, that members of MS-13 should be deported. Now, this person specifically should not have been deported to El Salvador, so that's fine. They should undo that. I agree with them undoing that. I am for due process, certainly. This person had due process at the time period years ago that they determined that he was, in fact, a member of MS-13.
Well, hold on. He had due process in the process of a protective order being put around him in 2019 by that judge who argued that were he to be returned to El Salvador, he would be in peril of being killed by a rival gang, right. Barrio 18. So that is, the due process protected his presence in the United States and protected him from being returned to El Salvador. And that is something that the Trump administration has, whether by accident or design, just run ramshackle over. That's a problem.
It is a problem, I agree with you, but doesn't that argument then thus concede that he is or was a member of this violent criminal gang, that he is going to face violence from a rival gang? He is then, in fact, in a gang. It's nice that he's been an upstanding citizen so far and a father, but most of the American people want all members of this gang deported, do they?
Well,
not?
I don't know. The issue is that he and his family were at risk from this Barrio 18 gang. Mm-hmm. I assume that Barrio 18, like any gang, doesn't only target people in rival gangs. I believe that Mr. Garcia's lawyer's argument is that his family were targeted for extortion by Barrio 18, and that he and his brother were threatened with death as a means of leverage to get money from them.
Sure, and the attorney's perspective is perfectly valid to consider, although his job is to advocate, obviously, on behalf of his client. I read the initial court filing, and the evidence was that both an informant who the court deemed credible and to have a past history of correctly identifying members of MS-13 had said that he was a member of MS-13, and also the clothes that he was wearing was this particular, I can't remember, it was a sports gear, not for the city they were in, is a identifier of that gang. The judge said in their decision that they wouldn't have the clothing on just that basis wouldn't have been enough, but in additionally the informant, it was solid enough to make that determination.
But that doesn't get around the bigger point, Robby, which is that by a legal order, a judge found that this man should be enabled to stay in the United States and not be sent to El Salvador because he would be under threat
But
of
he
his
shouldn't
life.
be sent to El Salvador. They did not. They said he could be deported anywhere else, just not to El Salvador.
But he's been deported to El Salvador.
Right, and that was a mistake, and they should rectify it.
Right.
But he does not have to remain in the country, and the Trump administration is undertaking an effort to deport people who are part of this gang, and there is a clear. I mean, it seems clear cut to me that they should not deport him, yes, to El Salvador.
Right.
But I'm not shedding tears for him being deported.
I don't understand how it's not clear cut to you that the wrong is that he's been sent to El Salvador.
Yes.
That's the wrong. That is the thing that the judge found couldn't be done.
Yes.
And the Trump administration has now done that. And when this other judge who we mentioned, Judge Zinnes, says bring him back, the Trump administration says, yeah, sorry, we can't really do that. Like, that is obviously, to use the judge's phrase, lawless on its face. Then you have the other point that we mentioned in our introduction, which is this lawyer suspended from the Department of Justice, apparently for giving basically truthful answers in a previous hearing when the judge said, look, they didn't really have authority to deport this guy to El Salvador, did they? And the Department of Justice lawyer said no. And that's like not really disputed by anyone, but because he's not buying into a fictitious line that this was in fact justified in some way, the guy is being suspended for stating facts, which should be part of a lawyer's job.
Yeah, I don't have any support for that. The administration has admitted this was an error, and I agree that they should work to correct it. They should get him out of that prison and then deport him somewhere else.
But that's what they say they're not going to do. That's the point. The point is the administration has been told, you made a mistake, this guy shouldn't be in El Salvador, that's in contravention of a court ruling, bring him back. And they're essentially saying no. That's lawless action by the government.
Well, they're saying they don't have the ability to get him back because he's in a prison that's not in this country anymore that they don't have jurisdiction over.
Yeah, but I mean, that's their bestie down there, the El Salvadoran president.
So they should apply diplomatic pressure to return a gang leader to the United States so that he can be deported somewhere else.
I think that they should comply with the law.
Well, I agree. They made a mistake, but he's not subject to our jurisdiction anymore. He's not in our country.
They made a mistake.
They removed a gang leader,
that they're making no effort to remedy.
They removed a gang member from our country
alleged.
To the wrong place. Well, I mean, it's not alleged though. It's part of the initial court decision.
It's alleged.
We can magically believe that maybe he was innocent, and maybe he was. I don't know, but evidence was presented, and the court case from 5 years ago, the judge determined that he was in fact a member of this gang.
The judge determined that he shouldn't be deported to El Salvador, which is what we keep coming back to. And the
Trump be deported to El Salvador.
It doesn't really matter what the law says, we'll deport who we like. It's a fundamentally lawless
action. They didn't say that, though. They said we made a mistake deporting him to El Salvador, but there's nothing we can do about it now because he's in a prison in a different country. And they should fix that. I agree with you, but I would save my outrage for an American citizen or a person who wasn't actually in a gang or something like that.
Well, I would save my outrage for a presidential administration that disregards the law.
All right. Tell us what you think. Up next, the anti-Trump protest that swept the nation this weekend we will discuss.